I'm Billy S, welcome back to the channel. Today we're continuing my Elden Ring series, ranking every boss in the game via their regions. It's time to delve through the Forbidden Lands, rise up the Grand Lift of Rold, and cross the hanging chains of the Mountaintops of the Giants. For the purposes of this video, I'll also be including the bosses of Crumbling Farum Azula on today's list. It's the legacy dungeon attached to the end of the Mountaintops region via the kiln, and I can't make a video for Farum Azula on its own, it's just 3 bosses, I'm not that starved for content. Interested in the other regions? Check the description for links to the other videos in this series. The only rule is that the bosses must have an official boss health bar. Let's jump right in. All 14 Elden Ring Mountaintops of the Giants bosses ranked. Let me know your favorites down below. At number 14, we have the Godskin duo found in Crumbling Farum Azula. What can I say about this pair that hasn't already been said by the wider community? You all know why I ranked them last on this list, and why they're one of my least favorite fights in the game. They're an incredibly unbalanced gank fight against 2 bosses that should work together well, but ultimately do not. Unlike every other fight in the game, you're not killing 2 opponents to win, but instead attacking a communal health bar, so even if you kill one of the Godskins, they'll respawn half a minute later so you can do the fight all over again. The biggest challenge is killing your first boss, as once they go down, you can make the fight a 1v1, and time the other Godskin's defeat with the respawn of the first Godskin. It's what I did on my last playthrough, and it actually worked out pretty fine. You can also use sleeping potions too, as the Godskin duo are incredibly weak to them, a totally fair bit of cheese, or get all the summon signs outside the boss door and make the duo suffer. This fight is more egregious to me though, because the Godskin Apostle is literally one of my favourite fights in the game, and to have him paired with his noble counterpart, only to discover that their movesets are both too aggressive, giving the player no room to breathe, is a real letdown. Defeating them gets you the Ash of War Black Flame Tornado, and as the main skill of the Godskin Peeler, I know how useful it can be. Even in base form, without any affinity upgrades to make it stronger, you're still dealing insane damage. They also drop the Smithing Stone Miner's Bell-Bearing 4, which allows players to purchase Smithing Stone 7s and 8s from the Twin Maiden Husks. The Godskin duo may suck as a boss fight, and as one of the worst ganks in the series, but at least they give you good reparations for your time spent. At number 13, we have the Spirit Caller Snail found in Spirit Caller Cave. Only sorpresa! The real crux of the fight is against the spirits of another Godskin Apostle and a Godskin Noble. Yup, it's just the Godskin duo fight all over again, except you're doing 2 1v1s as opposed to a 1v2. Survive the gauntlet, and the snail appears at the end, easily killable. This is honestly how the Spirit Caller Snail in Liurnia should have been set up. Force the player to fight at least 1 dangerous boss before revealing the snail's location, so the fight lasts longer. As it stands, I get 1 fight with my favourite boss, the Apostle, and 1 fight with one of my least favourite bosses, the Noble, which balances the fight to an even meh. I love the Spirit Caller Snails. I think they're fascinating creatures, and there could have been so much more done with them, but making us face Godskins, knowing we'll be facing the same bosses in the upcoming Legacy dungeon, it reeks of them not knowing what to throw in here, and needing an excuse to give the players some more Godskin-related items, as beating the Spirit Caller Snail gets you the Black Flame Ritual incantation, a signature move of the Noble, which allows you to summon pillars of black flame around you, as well as the Godskin Swaddling Cloth Talisman, which allows successive attacks to restore HP. For specific builds, it's a talisman that can work wonders. But you can see my point, those items are based on the Godskins. The snail had no reason to have them, so it feels like this pair got chucked in here so the devs would have an excuse to give those items out. At number 12, we have the Ulcerated Tree Spirit found in the Giants' Mountaintop Catacombs. In a previous video, I went on record explaining that this was one of the more disappointing Ulcerated Tree Spirits, because honestly, it feels really out of place. The Giant's Mountaintop Catacombs is one of the most complex mini-dungeons in the game, with a ton of different side paths and enemies to fight, with a rather unique gimmick to solve to reach the boss level. So getting through all of that to discover a simple tree spirit was disappointing to say the least. This is an entirely new zone of the world, and yet they couldn't come up with any new bosses for the catacombs and caves. Fighting a tree spirit in an enclosed space like the end of Catacomb Arena just isn't a fun time, and left me with a bad taste in my mouth when I finished this dungeon. It's an inoffensive boss at the end of the day, but hell, I'd have taken an ice-infused Erdtree Burial Watchdog instead, as you fight those on the optional path, and they end up being straight up tougher than the actual boss. Seriously, swap them around. We deserve to face at least one ice-infused Watchdog boss. You'll get a golden seed and the Glovewort Picker's Bell-bearing 2 for defeating the tree spirit, gaining you access to Grave Glovewort 4, 5, and 6 from the Twin Maiden husks, so it is worth coming here, but I can't promise you'll enjoy the boss fight. At number 11, we have the Ancient Hero of Zamor, found in the Giant Conquering Hero's Grave. While I dislike that this is the third time in the game we're encountering an Ancient Hero of Zamor, I do have to point out that unlike the Altus Plateau variant, at least this appearance makes sense. The Mountaintops are home to the ruins of Zamor, meaning this is their home biome, so having an Ancient Hero of Zamor as a boss fight makes complete sense, and them being the boss of a hero's grave also works due to their naming scheme. What I wish is that this boss was given a few more expanded moves to make this refight feel memorable. Instead, we get the same moveset we've faced twice already in boss fights prior, and a whole bunch of times in the ruins of Zamor themselves when you face the lesser heroes of Zamor. By the time we get here, we've got the moveset on lock, and there's nothing the boss can do to stop us. Maybe the damage output will be high, but it's the endgame. Your healing weapons and armor will be top-notch. It drops the Zamor armor set, as well as the Zamor curved sword upon its defeat, and while the moveset of the weapon leaves a lot to be desired, it does come with the Zamor Ice Storm skill, an incredibly powerful AoE that has a surprising amount of verticality to its hitbox. Flying enemies above you will fall to the cold, I assure you. A solid enough fight for the final hero's grave, but I still couldn't help but want something a little more memorable. At number 10, we have Borealis, the freezing fog, found at the Ice Lake in the Mountaintops. The best part of this fight is easily the intro. You ride out into this open expanse, and you're almost certain you're going to get attacked. But then a snowstorm whips up, it's hard to see, you're not sure where you're going, and then the roar of Borealis cuts through the mist. The fog dissipates, and this ice dragon stands at the ready, waiting to take you down. Borealis has received a lot of criticism by the community for certain aspects of their moveset, as while they have the default field dragon claw swipes, bites, slams, etc., all of their elemental breath attacks are tinged with ice, and it can be a real problem. The breath attack can 2 or 3 shot a prepared tarnish with its high damage output, and if it procs frostbite, you'll be taking even more damage from every hit while losing out on valuable stamina recovery in the process, which is fine. But then Borealis has a special roar attack. With these dragons you want to attack their heads, it's their weak spot. But this specific fight makes that a danger, as Borealis's roar causes damage and frostbite buildup if you're close by, and he seemingly uses this attack at random and without remorse. Combined with his stomps causing ice AoEs as well, and you have a boss that is doing everything it can to keep the player away. As the last field dragon in the game, I can respect the difficulty. This is how a creature should protect themselves from Tarnish trying to murder them, but as a player, it is frustrating to fight. For defeating this behemoth, you unlock Borealis's Mist, an incantation that can be purchased at the Dragon Communion Cathedral, which allows you to use his breath attack to inflict frostbite on your opponents. It's got its use, not something I'd personally have in my builds, but I respect the hustle. And that's the last field dragon I ever have to rank. Hallelujah. At number 9, we have the Knights Cavalry, found in the Forbidden Lands. When I think about the Knights Cavalries, this fight always comes to the forefront of my mind. There's just something so intimidating about exploring this foggy expanse at night, only to suddenly find yourself assaulted by the boss leaping out of the fog. Unlike past fights, where summoning Torrent feels like a valid strategy, here there's a hesitation due to the layout of the Forbidden Lands. You don't have a lot of space to play around with, and with how the horse controls, it's very easy to accidentally careen off the side of the area into the void. The white mist and fog combined with the dark black of the cavalry is so aesthetically pleasing, to the point where I don't mind refighting this boss again and again, especially as they wield the glaive, which has the easier moveset to handle compared to the flail. Defeating them gets you the Phantom Slash Ash of War, which allows you to feel your inner Pontiff Sullivan from Dark Souls 3, as an apparition of the cavalry's former instructor appears, and you both perform the same upward swing, followed by an additional attack, one after the other. He attacks first, you follow a moment later, etc. It's just a really cool skill. One perk of me doing this series actually is I'm getting to see what all the different boss drops can do, and I've got a ton of skills I really want to try out in the future. At number 8, we have the Erdtree avatar found at the Mountaintops Minor Erdtree. I already ranked this boss in my Erdtree avatar ranking, check that video out when you can, and I'm insanely high on this fight, because look, whether you love this fight or hate it, I'm never gonna dock points when a boss tries to do something unique. This Erdtree avatar at around 70% health will split itself into 2 clones for the rest of the fight. Both enemies still share the same boss health bar, so it's a Dark Souls 2 Dark Lurker situation, but with 2 big beefy tree men. This can be an overwhelming fight though, especially if the avatar's attacks don't line up. But to compensate, it's very easy to take these avatars down due to their weakness to AoE attacks. Black Flame Tornado in between the pair is devastating at the best of times, but there are so many different skills and sorceries that can take advantage of there being 2 enemies to hit, creating double the damage on the health bar. No other Erdtree avatar comes close to trying to innovate their fight, and it baffles me we didn't get more moments like this throughout the game with other bosses, where a tough boss we fought before gets a new move or a different permutation to make them stand out. It drops the Cerulean Crystal tier and the Crimson Bubble tier. The Crystal tier is the second of its kind, restoring half a player's FP, and when combined with its pair, it restores all a player's FP. The Bubble tier, meanwhile, will restore health to the player when they're near death. If you land below 21% health, you're going to get a health boost to keep you alive, though it's worth noting it can't save you from an attack that drops you to 0 HP. For the last regular Erdtree avatar, I'm glad this fight ends up being memorable, and while it's not for everyone, it is for me. Well, we've climbed high into the mountaintops, and I want to climb higher with my channel. We're trying to reach 35,000 subscribers by the end of the year, and my overall channel goal is to try and reach 100,000 subscribers by ranking a ton of shit. If you guys are interested in supporting the channel, consider parrying that subscribe button down there so you can stay up to date on all my future videos. Or if you want to go the extra mile and you really love what you see, become a channel member. It is $4.99 a month. It gets you early access to future videos. It gets you a shout out in the description and at the end of each video as well. It's the best way to support the channel. It means the world. Thank you so much for listening. Back to the mountains. At number 7, we have Vike, Knight of the Round Table, found in the Lord Contender's Everjail. Vike is one of those boss fights that you might not think much of on your first playthrough, but once you're aware of the story surrounding the character, it's hard to look at him the same way. A Tarnished who was close to the throne of Elden Lord, he descended Lane Dell and branded himself with the Three Fingers. Whether it was to save his Finger Maiden or an outside play by Shabriri, he fell from grace and was imprisoned for his crimes. Oh, and he's the dude on the Elden Ring box art. When we battle him, he only uses Dragon Cult incantations, meaning that at least within the Everjail, the influence of the Three Fingers has completely dissipated. He's got a Wind Slam AoE, multiple melee attacks, a Lightning Strike that attack the player's position, and 2 incantations as well. The first is Fortisax's Lightning Spear, which creates 2 lightning spears that, when slammed into the ground, create 2 lightning waves that travel outwards. as well as the incantation you obtain from Vaike upon defeating him, Vaike's Dragon Bolt. Its main skill is to buff your weapon with lightning damage, while reducing lightning damage negation by 35% as a trade-off. Its secondary skill is to buff your equip load by 15% for the duration of the buff as well. Does it have use? I'm not so sure, but that's for you to judge. Vaike is a surprisingly tough opponent, and can kill the most prepared of players if they toy with him for too long, myself included. At least once he goes down, you can strip him of his fingerprint armor set and become the true Mr. Elden Ring though. At number 6, we have the Deathrite bird found on the hill leading to Castle Sol. For many players, myself included, this will be their first encounter with this boss type, because unlike the rest of the Deathrite birds, this one will also appear during the day, and you always have to pass its arena to reach Castle Sol. I attempted this boss both on foot and with Torrent, and no matter what I did, the Deathrite bird always felt in control. It doesn't have any unique properties that make it stand out from the others in the game, and yet I can't explain it, but I just feel this guy is harder. He's got a ton of HP, so you're in for a long fight, and the Ghost Flame AoE attacks do insane levels of damage. The one that creates lines that burst out in 4 different directions always clipped me, and its stagger damage led to a lot of deaths. In fact, of all the bosses, this Deathrite bird is one of only a handful to actually force me into the double-digit attempts. But I love the challenge. I needed more bosses in the game to take me into those double digits, make me try different strategies to claim victory, fuck around with items, talismans, etc. Next time though, I will be bringing a holy weapon to the fight. I want to shred these birds into KFC. He drops the Death Ritual Spear upon defeat, which has a fun little weapon skill, Spear Call Ritual, which launches spears from the sky into your opponents. But the weapon on its own needs a proper build built around it to really be viable. This is the Deathrite bird I, and many other players, will remember for the rest of our days. One of the best field bosses in the game, in my subjective, and I stress, subjective opinion. At number 5, we have the Blackblade Kindred found at the end of the Forbidden Lands. This servant of Malekith guards the Grand Lift of Rold, understandable as the only reason any would have to visit the Mountaintops is to burn the Erd Tree and make their way to Crumbling Farum Azula for destined death. But he failed to account for the ancient strategy of hopping on Torrent, riding all the way past the boss to the lift itself, and activating the nearby Site of Grace for a very easy respawn point. I actually think this boss's placement is a bit evil, as most players won't realize their destination is a few moments away, and may get stuck fighting the Kindred instead. There's a Stake of Marika, so you always respawn though, which is nice, and like the Knights Cavalry from earlier, the Blackblade Kindred being a stark contrast to the white fog of the area really helps it to stand out, and with it being the better version of the Valiant Gargoyle enemy type, I love going toe-to-toe with its enhanced moveset. It's easier than the Dragon Barrow variant, and wields the Black Blades and Black Axe, a twin blade moveset with a giant axe on the side, which means this boss has close and long range attacks to harm the player. I always find the Blackblade Kindred to be great fights. They're tanky enough to feel meaningful to the player, and their movesets are honestly pretty entertaining to learn. I actually feel like with enough practice, I could get really good at facing these guys, which, for me, is a great compliment. It drops its weapons, the Gargoyle's Black Axe and the Gargoyle's Black Blades, upon defeat. Whether these weapons are good or not, I'm not certain, as their weapon skills are woefully average, but they scale really well with Faith builds due to their extra holy damage, so if that's what you're after. This Blackblade Kindred made me jump out of my seat on my first playthrough, and I'll always give him props for that. Kudos to you, man. At number 4, we have Commander Niall, the boss of Castle Sol. While he and Commander O'Neill in Gilad are based on the same style of fight, I do think they play out incredibly differently. Niall, rather than summoning an army of phantoms to attack you, instead summons 2 banished knights at the start of the fight. It's actually possible to backstab one of them as they spawn for quick damage, fun tip for you all, and in order to get the true battle to start, you either have to kill the 2 spirits or do enough damage to Niall that he enters his enraged state. I find that this fight is a DPS check, as the first time I arrived here, I got absolutely bodied by Niall, leading me to go do some optional fights and level up. Once his spirits are defeated, Niall showcases why he's different to O'Neill, as on top of his standard, which he uses to create icy gusts of winds that can inflict frostbite on the player, he has a prosthetic leg that he can charge with lightning to deal devastating damage. His Storm Kick ability is dangerous, as he can use it both in the air or grounded, and it has a large shockwave upon impact that can be tough to time the dodges for. You also need to watch out for his Whirlwind dash attack. The quick variant is very reminiscent of Godric's bowling ball move, and can be dodged in a similar fashion, but if he decides to use the charged Whirlwind, you need to make distance and ensure you dodge this attack, as if you do, Niall loses his breath and takes a hefty amount of time to recharge, giving you free hits galore. Taking Niall down gets you the Veteran's Prosthesis, his bladed leg, which is a fun weapon in concept and definitely worth mucking about with, but not a particularly meta pick by any stretch of the imagination. Defeating him also gets you the second half of the Halig Tree Medallion found atop the castle, making him a requirement to face all the reused bosses in the snowfield. I definitely enjoy Niall, and the fact he's only frostbiting me and not scarlet rotting me might have a little something to do with it. At number 3, we have the Fire Giant, found at the peak of the Mountaintops of the Giants. One of the most misunderstood fights when the game first came out, I'm also guilty of finding the Fire Giant to be an absolutely frustrating mess because I couldn't understand what the game wanted me to do for its Phase 2. Its Phase 1 is fairly straightforward. You're faced with this giant towering monster, and the only way to damage him is to attack his left leg, destroying a wrapping to reveal a weak spot. From here, the Fire Giant becomes more defensive, rolling away from the player, using fire orbs that explode when in close proximity to the Tarnished, and just generally trying to blast you with fireballs when he can. I find the Fire Giant feels more intimidating than he ends up being, but Phase 1 ultimately is a quick affair once you've got your own strategy for breaking that bracelet and doing the damage. As I said, it's Phase 2 where the confusion hits for most players, because all of the guides when the game first came out kept telling players to continue aiming for the leg, as that's what worked in Phase 1, leading to a rather tedious affair of brutal flame attacks that you can barely notice because you're attacking behind the giant, and the camera also hates you. Cut to my recorded playthrough and I realised this just wasn't what From Software intended. They want you to stand your ground in front of the Fire Giant, and instead bait it into attacks that leave its central eye vulnerable. And once that clicks, the fight becomes infinitely more manageable and way more interesting. Now, I still struggled to actually hit the eye for decent damage. I know it's a weak point, but the hitbox is incredibly finicky, which led for me going to the giant's hands instead. With enough practice though, I think I could capitalize on his weakness. I love how his Phase 2 involves ripping off his own leg so it can release the true power of pyromancies. Flame Fall Upon Them is its craziest attack, a series of falling, burning, explosive rocks that encompass the battlefield. I love it. Fighting the Fire Giant from the front is just really refreshing. I actually get to see what it's doing half the time, and I can dodge attacks. That's crazy! Is it one of my favourite fights in the game? Not really, but with an understanding of what the game wants from me, facing the giant as the developers intended led to a truly fulfilling experience. Now then, Crumbling Farum Azula called, and they have my top 2 bosses for this video. At number 2, we have Malekith, the Black Blade, found at the end of Crumbling Farum Azula. I've recently talked about this fight, as for my subjective experience, Malekith is one of the hardest fights in Soulsborne. That's not going to be the case for everyone, but he challenges me no matter the playthrough, and for that, I really respect him. Starting as the Beast Clergyman, you have to betray your ally Grunk and break his heart, avoiding his bestial incantations as you go. His bestial sling is the one that hit me the most. Rocks are tough to dodge, especially when they have a quick casting time. His Beast Claw did a ton of damage, but using the pillars meant I could stay out of their range. The Stone of Grunk was easy though. Man just chucks a single boulder at me. Oh no, I'm so scared. Maliketh truly comes into his own when he sheds his cloak and reveals his true nature, as the Black Blade of Marika. Here he enters his flippy shit mode, becoming a WWE wrestler as he bounces off of the floors and walls with the intent to kill while cosplaying Rey Mysterio. His attacks are very frantic and fast-paced, but he doesn't actually have a lot of combo strings, which means the fight is less about predicting what he's going to do next, and more reacting to a handful of combos to get the best result. You can use the Blasphemous Claw to parry certain moves, causing Maliketh to stagger, though in true Lies of P fashion, Maliketh can still harm you while staggered due to a rogue sword swing. How cruel, FromSoft. His difficulty comes from his Destined Death effect. Certain attacks of his will lower your maximum HP temporarily, and also cause a health drain effect that forces the player to heal. Basically, how well you do against Maliketh depends on how well you can avoid his more devastating attacks, because once you've mastered that, his health pool is relatively small, leading to a glass cannon style fight. It won't take long to determine a victor, but you're both fighting at a high level, so the tension never lets up. Also, the furries fucking love him. Plus, if you defeat Maliketh, you can use his remembrance to claim Maliketh's Black Blade for yourself, complete with the Destined Death weapon skill that creates one of his signature moves where blade flurries surround him in an AoE. So cool. But there's just one more boss in Farum Azula I have a stronger fondness for. At number 1, we have Dragon Lord Placidusax. One of Elden Ring's hidden super bosses, he's one of the only fights where you have to actively seek him out, dropping down a series of rocky paths until you reach this platform, where you lay down and allow the winds to take you. The reveal of Placidusax in this ancient arena that was the original Farum Azula is jaw-dropping. It's one of my favorite opening boss cutscenes in one of my favorite arenas in the series, and yes, I promise I'll do some arena rankings after the DLC videos are out and done. But for me, what I love so much about Placidusax is the grandiose nature of his fight. His health bar is massive, allowing him to have 3 distinct phases that challenge the player. That is, unless you bring a build that combines overpowered spells to melt him immediately, and that's totally valid, I won't judge anyone for cheesing him, but I enjoy his fight so much that I want to fight him while experiencing all of his moveset. From the initial phase, where you have to avoid his generic claw swipes and surprisingly tough fire breath combos, to his lightning bolts that force you to keep moving as your position is constantly marked with strike zones. Or how about the Bolt of Placidusax, where he creates a massive bolt of red lightning you have to run from due to the insanely large AoE, and how when it hits, it actively cuts out the boss music due to the large nature of the explosion. Just listen to it. Speaking of the music, the fact that Placidusax has a simple theme that grows dynamically in orchestral grandeur as each new phase is reached is absolute ear candy for my soul. I love when Placidusax decides to get real, rising into the sky and warping away, creating storm clouds around the arena before dive bombing the player. Then there's his teleports that you can track as long as you're locked onto him, there's his tough to read claw swipes that feel great to dodge, and upon reaching the last phase he'll use Placidusax's Ruin, where after dive bombing the player, he'll turn around breathing streams of fire that immediately turn into giant Medeer lasers. It's such a cinematic attack that forces you to understand your positioning and makes you feel like a god as you avoid it, all set to the backdrop of various red lightning strikes that highlight the sheer power of Placidusax. And if you kill him, you get to use Placidusax's Ruin as your own incantation. Ooh! He's an Elden Lord after all, and yet he's only at around 40% of his original power. He used to have 5 heads, but we only face him with 2 remaining. I can only imagine how brutal he'd be at full strength. Defeating Placidusax just feels really good. He's not the most well-balanced fight in the game or anything, and I fully understand why some don't really vibe with him. But he's my favourite dragon fight in the series, and the setup of his boss fight with the phases and the dynamic music and the way his attacks all continue to build on top of each other, for me, it is exactly what I love. Placidus Axe, congratulations! 2 years later, and I still adore you, my man. And that's my list. Which Mountaintops of the Giants boss is your favourite? Let me know down below, and be sure to parry that subscribe button so you can stay up to date on all of my future videos. My social medias are on screen now, feel free to follow where you feel comfortable. I recommend my Twitter or my Discord. My Twitter is definitely the best place to go though. A massive shout out to all my YouTube channel members for supporting me for another month. Thank you all, you guys are amazing. It's $4.99 a month if anybody is interested, links are down below. You get early access to future videos and a shout out here and in the description as well. And I'll see you guys next time for another video. Adios!